This story of the Victorian baker begins long before the first customer steps into his shop. In the stillness of night, while the city sleeps, he rises to prepare the dough that will feed his community. His world is one of heat, dust, and repetition, a rhythm that seems ordinary but hides a slow and deadly truth. The flour he works with is everywhere, drifting through the air like a fine mist, settling on his clothes, his hair, his skin, and most dangerously, in his lungs. Each breath he takes carries with it tiny particles that scratch and scar from within, leaving him coughing, wheezing, and slowly suffocating over the years. The bakery itself is warm and inviting, the smell of fresh bread comforting to those who pass by. But for the baker, it is a trap, a place where the very air he breathes is filled with poison. In Victorian times, bread was not simply flour, water, and yeast. To make loaves appear whiter and more appealing, bakers often mixed in alum, chalk, or even ground bones. These substances stretched the flour further, making it cheaper to produce, but they also introduced toxins into the daily diet of ordinary people. The baker, handling these powders day after day, was exposed more than anyone. His hands cracked and burned, his chest grew tight, and yet he continued, because bread was life, and without it, families would starve. Imagine him at his bench, sleeves rolled up, sweat dripping down his brow as he kneads dough with practiced strength. The flour rises around him in clouds, catching the light of the oil lamps, turning the air into a shimmering haze. To the eye it might look almost magical, but to his lungs it is suffocating. He coughs, wipes his mouth, and presses on, because the ovens must be filled, the shelves must be stocked, and the customers will soon arrive. Outside, the world smells only the sweetness of baking bread, never suspecting the bitterness hidden within. The irony is cruel. The baker's work sustains life, yet it slowly takes his own. His customers smile as they carry home warm loaves, unaware that the whiteness of the bread they prize is achieved through chemicals that harm both them and the man who made it. The baker himself may not fully understand the science, but he feels the effects. His chest is heavy, his breath shallow, his nights restless. Still, he rises each morning, because the work is not just a job, but a duty. Bread is the foundation of every meal, and without it, there is hunger. The danger is invisible, and that makes it all the more insidious. Unlike the sudden violence of an accident, this is a slow erosion, a creeping decay that takes years to reveal itself. The baker grows older before his time, his body worn down by the very substance that gives others strength. And yet, there is dignity in his labor. He is proud of the loaves lined neatly on the shelves, the golden crusts that crackle as they cool, the satisfaction of knowing that his work feeds his neighbors. He may cough into his sleeve, but he smiles as he hands over bread to a mother with children, or to a worker heading to his shift. His sacrifice is hidden, unspoken, but it is real. In the quiet of history, his story is easy to overlook. We remember kings and battles, but not the man who rose before dawn to bake bread. Even though his life was just as much a part of the fabric of the past, the Victorian baker's tale is one of paradox. A man whose work was essential, whose skill was respected, yet whose health was consumed by the very act of providing for others. The smell of bread, so comforting, so homely, was also the veil that hid the danger. As you picture him now, standing in the glow of the oven, surrounded by the haze of flour, remember that his story is not one of drama or spectacle, but of quiet It is a reminder that history is not only shaped by the powerful, but also by the ordinary, whose struggles were no less real. The baker's life was one of service, but also of sacrifice. And in the warmth of his shop lay a hidden chill, the knowledge that every loaf carried with it a price paid not in coins, but in health, in breath, and years lost. This is the haunting truth of when work was lethal, that even the simplest, most ordinary professions could carry dangers as deadly as any battlefield, and that behind the comfort of daily bread was the slow, silent cost of the man who made it. The life of the chimney sweep in Victorian times was a life of shadows, soot, and stolen childhood. Imagine a boy no older than 7, his body small enough to be pushed into the narrowest of flues where no grown man could ever fit. He does not wake to the sound of birds or the warmth of sunlight, but to the call of his master, urging him into the cold morning streets. His tools are simple: a brush, a scraper, and his own fragile body. The chimneys he climbs are dark, suffocating tunnels, lined with soot, that clings to his skin, his clothes, and his lungs. Each climb is a battle against fear, against the crushing weight of stone and brick pressing in on all sides. The air inside is thick, heavy with dust, and every breath feels like swallowing smoke. Sometimes the flues are so tight that he must wriggle inch by inch, his knees and elbows scraping raw against the walls. Panic reses when he becomes stuck, his cries muffled by the chimney's throat. And there are stories of boys who never emerged, their small bodies trapped forever in the darkness. Even when he survives the climb, the dangers remain. The soot burns his eyes, irritates his skin, and settles deep in his lungs, planting seeds of disease that will grow silently for years. Many sweeps developed what came to be known as sootwort, a form of cancer that scarred their bodies long after childhood had ended. Burns were common too, for sometimes the chimneys were still warm from fires not fully extinguished. A single spark could blister his skin, leaving scars that never faded. And yet, despite the pain, the work continued, because the fires of the city had to be kept safe, and the chimneys had to be cleared. What makes the story most haunting is the contrast between innocence and labor. These were children who should have been playing in fields, chasing sunlight, or learning their letters. Yet they were swallowed by darkness. Their laughter was replaced by coughing, their games by the scraping of soot. They were called climbing boys, but their climbs were not toward trees or hillsy. They were into narrow, airless spaces where every ascent was a brush with death. Outside, life went on. Families warmed themselves by fires made safer by the sweep's work, never seeing the child who had risked his life in the flue. When he emerged, covered head to toe in black, his face streaked with soot, his eyes red and watering, he was not celebrated, but sent back again, because the work was endless. The city's chimneys smoked day and night, and so the boys climbed day and night, their childhoods consumed by labor. There is a cruel irony in their existence. The warmth and comfort of a family hearth was bought at the cost of a child's health, sometimes even his life. The sweep's body was both tool and sacrifice, his small frame used up in service of others' safety. And yet, in the quiet of history, their voices are faint, almost forgotten. They did not leave behind monuments or books, only the memory of soot-covered faces and the echo of small hands scraping against brick. As you picture them now, imagine the silence of the chimney, the darkness pressing in, the faint sound of coughing echoing through the flue. It is a story not of glory, but of endurance, of children who bore dangers far beyond their years. Their innocence was consumed by soot, their lives shortened by the very work that kept others safe. And in that haunting contrast lies the truth of when work was lethal, that even the smallest, most ordinary hands carried the heaviest burdens. Climbing. 2 matchstick factories of the Victorian age were places where light was born out of darkness, but at a terrible cost. Inside long, dim rooms, rows of women and girls bent over their work, dipping thin wooden sticks into a pale, dangerous substance, white phosphorus. At first glance, the task seemed simple, almost harmless. The girls laughed, whispered, and sang as they worked, their chatter filling the air alongside the faint chemical smell. Yet the very material that gave them achest as their spark was slowly consuming them. White phosphorus clung to their skin, their hair, their clothes, and even their breath. When they left the factory at night, some carried with them a faint, eerie glow, as if their faces and hands were lit by starlight. To passers-by, it might have seemed magical, a strange beauty in the darkness. But that glow was not a gift. It was a warning. The poison worked slowly, invisibly, until it revealed itself in the most horrifying way. At first, the girls complained of toothaches, then swelling in their jaws. Soon, the disease known as phossy jaw took hold, rotting the very bones of their faces from within. The pain was unbearable, the smell unmistakable, and the disfigurement impossible to hide. Yet many continued to work, because the wages, tug meher, were needed for survival. Their families depended on them, and so they endured the slow destruction of their bodies in silence. The contrast was cruel. These were young women, some still children, who should have been full of life and promise. Instead, their youth was consumed by the glow of phosphorus, a light that seemed enchanting, but carried death in its shine. Every match they dipped promised warmth and fire for someone else, but for them it carried only decay. The irony was bitter. The very substance that brought light into homes and factories was extinguishing the lives of those who created it. Imagine the scene at night, when a group of match girls walked home together. Their hair shimmered faintly. Their faces glowed with a pale, ghostly light. To an outsider, it might have looked like a procession of spirits drifting through the streets. But behind the glow was exhaustion, pain, and the knowledge that their work was slowly killing them. The glow that fascinated others was, for them, a reminder of their fate. And yet, they endured. They joked, they sang, they shared stories as they worked, finding moments of joy in the midst of danger. Their resilience was as remarkable as their suffering. They were not remembered in grand histories, but their lives carried a quiet heroism, a strength born of necessity. The Matchstick Girls remind us that progress often came at a terrible cost, paid not by the powerful, but by the vulnerable. Their story is haunting because it is both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary, because striking a match is such a simple act, something we take for granted. Extraordinary, because behind that act lies the suffering of countless young women whose lives were shortened by the very light they created. The glow of phosphorus was both beautiful and deadly, a light that illuminated the darkness, while quietly extinguishing the lives of those who made it. As you picture them now, walking home under the dim lamps of the Victorian streets, their faces faintly shining, remember that their glow was not magic, but poison. It was the light of sacrifice, the light of lives consumed in silence. And in that haunting glow lies the truth of when work was lethal, that even the smallest flame could carry with it the weight of suffering, and that behind the warmth of progress were stories of pain, endurance, and quiet tragedy. The gravedigger's world was one of silence, soil, and shadows. His work began in the stillness of dawn or the fading light of evening, when the churchyard was quiet and the only sound was the steady scrape of his shovel cutting into the earth. Each strike was heavy, not only with dirt, but with the weight of what lay beneath. The ground he disturbed was not just soil, but a mixture of decay, disease, and memory. In times of plague or epidemic, the danger was even greater, for the very air he breathed could carry death. The gravedigger was not simply a laborer. He was a man who lived with mortality pressed close against him every day, every breath. The earth sometimes betrayed him, collapsing suddenly, threatening to bury him in the very graves he dug. The air, heavy with foul vapors, could sicken him without warning. Yet he continued, because the dead had to be buried, and the living demanded dignity for their departed. Not far from him, in another corner of Victorian life, the tanner worked in conditions no less grim. His trade was essential, turning animal hides into leather for shoes, belts, saddles, and countless other goods, but the process was brutal. Hides were soaked in vats of urine, lime, and harsh chemicals. The stench was overwhelming, clinging to his skin, his clothes, his very breath. Day after day, he stood ankle-deep in foul mixtures, his hands raw and burned from constant contact with caustic substances. The air around the tanneries was so noxious that people avoided walking nearby, and those who worked within were marked by the smell wherever they went. They were outcasts, necessary yet shunned, their labor vital but their presence unwelcome. Both the gravedigger and the tanner lived lives surrounded by death in different forms, one by the bodies of the departed, the other by the skins of animals. Their work was indispensable, yet it carried dangers that slowly consumed them. The gravedigger risked disease and collapse, the tanner slow poisoning and social isolation. Neither man was celebrated, neither remembered in monuments or songs, yet their labor sustained the living in ways few acknowledged. The shoes on a child's feet, the solemn burial of a loved one, these simple acts were made possible by men who endured danger and stench as part of their daily existence. There is something haunting in their invisibility. They were men who lived on the margins, their work hidden in plain sight, their sacrifices unnoticed. And yet, without them, life could not go on. The gravedigger ensured that the dead were laid to rest, that the living could grieve in peace. The tanner ensured that people were clothed, that soldiers marched with boots, that horses carried riders with saddles. Their work was everywhere, even if they themselves were avoided. As you picture them now, imagine the gravedigger pausing to wipe his brow, leaning on his shovel as the church bell tolls in the distance. Imagine the tanner, his hands cracked and red, standing over a vat of hides, the stench rising around him like a cloud. These are not grand images of history, but they are real, and they linger. Their stories remind us that progress and comfort often rested on the shoulders of those who lived and worked in peril. And, in the quiet of their lives, lies a strange calm. They did not seek glory, only survival. They endured the dangers of their trades because someone had to, because life demanded it. Their sacrifices are easy to forget, but in remembering them, we see the truth of when work was lethal, that even the most ordinary professions carried extraordinary risks, and that behind the simple comforts of daily life were men who labored in silence, surrounded by death in the air.